For more on Reconciliation Day, we are joined by Institute of Race Relations Fellow Gabriel Crouse and political analyst Dr. Clyde Ramalaine. Thank you so much to you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. And a happy Day of Reconciliation to you both. I suppose it's been a good one. Perhaps let's start with you, Doc, and maybe just to start off the conversation with regards to what should reconciliation be looking like for South Africa 31 years on?
Thank you so much for having us today. It's indeed a privilege to be with you and to my colleague, Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Well, I guess if you now rewind the tape and you go back to before 1994, you would then see a people that had dreamt, was willing to sacrifice their lives to find what we would call the common destiny of a future. And that future was filled with hope, and that hope was a place of safety. That hope articulated the desire of equality. That hope also connoted the conviction that South Africans would be equal in that sense, in that future. However, that dream is not at this point in time what was dreamt in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s, and we can go back right up until the 1652s for that matter. So reconciliation should speak to a South Africa that is equal. Reconciliation should speak to a South Africa in which we acknowledge the reality of where we come from, unequivocally so and unashamedly so, in which we find one another beyond the sentimental issues of neighbors talking to one another, but being responsible to the fact to realize that our social cohesion is a structural problem. So therefore, what I'm saying is that the dream of us being equal one with each other, in which discrimination, in which racism, in which equality reigns, that was the dream originally. Of course, we hit some bad winds, some bad winds we struck, and we are trying to deal with what we currently have, in my opinion, as a crisis of social cohesion.
So you call this a crisis of social cohesion, Gabriel. From a race relations perspective, what do you think are the main challenges that still put us at a place where we are not acknowledging what the current reality is, and as Doctor describes it, that we have a social cohesion structural problem?
I think that it's important to answer that question. Let me say greetings to you and Dr. Ramalaine. Good wishes on this Reconciliation Day to all the viewers. I think it's important to frame the answer just by noting that race relations are part of a bigger story to do with South African pain and opportunity, and failure and success. So on the race relations front alone, polling, some of it commissioned by the Institute of Race Relations, some of it commissioned by Afrobarometer, a number of other organizations as well, all indicate that, roughly speaking, 70–80% of the country want to go forward on a non-racial basis together. You earlier showed Karel Boshoff there, who claims to speak for white Afrikaners. He certainly does not speak for me. He certainly does not speak for many white Afrikaners, perhaps most who some have, have spoken out against him. Very few support him. But there are people like Karel Boshoff on the white side who want to split this country literally into pieces. There are people like Julius Malema who chant things like kill the boer, kill the farmer. There are some South Africans on either extreme who are not seeking reconciliation, who are not seeking go forward together, practical, humane, common energy. They're seeking something different. But the overwhelming majority of South Africans, I think if you just think of your own experience going around this country, it will probably resonate with this polling, which is done year in and year out from random people. People really want to work together on a non-racial basis. So I think how can we improve and deepen and strengthen reconciliation? And I think Dr. Ramalaine is right. There is a social cohesion problem. I'll just say one more data point before I say how we can improve it. Afrobarometer did a survey where they asked, do you trust your neighbors? Do you trust strangers? Do you trust people of the same race or different race? Do you trust South Africans? Do you trust foreigners? One of the interesting things was there was basically no difference, no statistically significant difference between people's trust of strangers of the same race and trust of strangers of different races. So it shows we trust, the race is not the trust issue. But then if you look at the trust of government organizations, do you trust the police to show up on time? Do you trust politicians not to steal money or do other corrupt activities? Do you trust various institutions within our system of government? We scored on some of those fronts basically the lowest in Africa in terms of trust. So there's a huge breakdown in trust in our democracy. A small majority of people would actually give up the democracy for a dictator who could deliver jobs and security. So in order for us to go forward and address these kinds of challenges and save our democracy and deepen reconciliation, I think the focus has to be on finding ways to improve job opportunities, to alleviate poverty, to open up opportunities, ladders into the middle class, and to strengthen the middle class too. The Reconciliation Project in that sense is a growth project. It's a project of taking a country that has had no real economic growth since 2007 when I matriculated high school. My entire adulthood and people like me, we've never lived in a country that's grown economically in a real way. If that turns around, I think that remaining 20%, black, white, Indian, colored, that doesn't really want to live together with everyone else, that wants to continue to bite one another, that group will settle down and calm down. As opportunities expand, the people in the middle will grow stronger and stronger and stronger together.
Most certainly. Dr. Gabriel speaks of the neighborliness, and you penned a piece in which you touched on the 2024 Social Cohesion Index, and it speaks about they being index registered with modest improvements, and one of them being in neighborhood solidarity and interpersonal trust. But you emphasize the fragility of our country's social fabric. How do you see the current political economy contributing to social disaffection?
Thank you. Just to latch on to what Gabriel said now, while the ideal of a non-racial South Africa is, of course, everyone's desire, the problem in this country and with the party that leads this axiom or this desire or this vision is that it is nowhere filled with content. No one can explain to us what they mean when they talk about non-racial. Now, I will dare to assert that for as long as we uphold race as a benign construct, for as long as we subscribe to the notion that race is not a challenge, but racism is, we will always have this problem. Why do I say that? I say South Africa, in my opinion, cannot claim non-racism when the state remains the primary racial classifier. What transpired in post-apartheid South Africa was that we abandoned what we call apartheid, supremacy of white race in that regard, but we held on tighter to the subject matter of racial administration in this country. And so what Gabriel and them share with us, I find problematic, because the idea that myself and my neighbor getting along becomes a fundamental indicator when the reality of the structural aspects of our divisions and our challenges is there. We cannot use these sentimental index or percentages as a base to argue what even the race relations argue. As a matter of fact, we must actually ask the fundamental question in this regard. Would institutions like race relations exist if we had abandoned race right at the beginning when we started this negotiated settlement? Because race by itself is a currency, it is an economy, and people live from it. So when I talk about the structural challenge that we are dealing with, I'm saying that for as long as we keep on, even the president referred to this evening, that, the neighbors are happy with one another. The problem is not the neighbors being happy. The problem is there's the political economy that divides us. And for as long as we don't want to deal with the critical subjects, we are going to perpetually have a situation where these things, I call them the stresses, flare up at any point in time.
Right.
And so okay.
Yes, you may finish your thought.
So I'm saying that for me, the dishonesty is in the conversation about social cohesion. We are not being honest. If we are going to be honest about that, we must first accept that there is a fundamental and foundational reality that we have to contend with. And that reality for me, number one, is we must admit where we come from. We must own where we come from without any excuses in that regard. Once we have that foundation, we can then move to what I call the structural catalyst, which means we must make a decision that race must be dealt with once and for all. We cannot hold on to race. Even if the current government uses it for its means to redress, we have seen what that redressing looks like. Let me give you a classic example. Right now, as we speak, there are two major commissions afoot in this country. We have the Madlanga Commission. We also have the Nkabinde inquiry. These are major and important commissions in that regard. These two commissions are currently constituted in identity in terms of who leads them. 3 in Madlanga, they all are defined with what the African National Congress shared with us as an African in particular identity. Go right now to the Nkabinde inquiry. There are 3 ladies. I'm not arguing their credibility in terms of their skills, but why in South Africa is it acceptable that we can have at this time of our dispensation, we can have one particular race group, and no one argues why there's no other race group participating in leading this process or being a part of the panel in that regard. I'm showing you that as a simple example to show you that the state itself is not serious about this idea of non-racialism.
Dr. Ramalaine, let's hold it there. Let's just hold that thought there because it's quite an interesting point that you raised, but we certainly do need to take a break. We are speaking about the social fabric of South Africa on this day of reconciliation. Remember, you can also give us your thoughts. You can send us your WhatsApps on 072-110-5584 or give us a call on 010-594-6010. We'll continue with this discussion after the break. Welcome back. We are speaking on the Day of Reconciliation as we are commemorating today, and we're joined by the Institute of Race Relations Fellow Gabriel Crouse, as well as political analyst Dr. Clyde Ramalaine. Remember, you can also send us your comments as well as your questions as we continue with this conversation. So, Gabriel, earlier on, Doctor raised a very important point with regards to the Madlanga Commission as well as the Nkabinde Commission and who we place there as representatives of the country. And of course, he did stress that the quality of the people that we put there would be first and foremost. But how do we find that balance in a country where we've got so much diversity?
Our position is that there is no problem whatsoever if all 6 of the commission leaders are black. There's no problem whatsoever if all of them are white or Indian or colored. It really is the case that what matters most, first and foremost, is that the best people be chosen for the job. And in this case, I think the best people are all black, and that's fine. I think that sometimes in South Africa, we talk about representation. Now, the notion of representation is as old as the notion of democracy itself. The members of parliament are our representatives. We vote for them to represent us. Our sports teams are our representatives. Our ambassadors are our representatives. And a representative of South Africa should represent all South Africans. The notion that only black people represent black people or white people represent white people was an apartheid-era notion. It's also a notion espoused by people like Dr. Karel Boshoff, who was earlier shown, who thinks that he can only really be represented by white Afrikaners. Anyone else is too alien to his folk in order to represent him. So there's some South Africans, again, there's 10 to 20% of South Africans who want to put themselves in racial boxes and who think that only people who look like them can really represent them. But our research shows that most South Africans, if you ask questions like, do you want your teacher of your children to be the same race as you, or don't you care? All that matters is that you get the best teacher for the job to teach your children. There's 10 or 15% of people who say they don't want the best teacher. They just want a teacher who looks the same as them. Again, the Karel Boshoffs, the Malemas, but 80, 90% say they don't care how does the teacher look. They just want the best person for the job. And we find similar results when we look at other questions to do with things like political leadership. So I think that the way forward, where Dr. Ramalaine and I agree, the Institute of Race Relations, which has been around since 1929, this thing would never have existed if it wasn't for apartheid and the pre-apartheid system of white supremacist racial discrimination from the government. It never would have needed to continue to exist if it wasn't for BEE. If you want to make the Institute of Race Relations go away, then in a sense we share a mission. I also want to make it go away. I want my job to be redundant and foolish as soon as possible. And the way for that to happen is for us to remove all racial classifications of an involuntary nature by the government and to relax as South Africans about the possibility that sometimes there'll be a commission where all 6 people are black. And if they're chosen on merit, that's fine. And sometimes there'll be a commission where all 6 people are colored. And if they're chosen on merit, that's fine. And it's already the case that most South Africans are there. One final polling detail, when asked the question, do you believe that the inequalities between the races will disappear slowly but surely if there are more jobs and better education? An overwhelming majority of people say yes, around 80%. So, the idea that we've reached this point in our history where the majority of the middle class, the top 20%, the top 5%, and even the top 2% of income earners, the majority are black, colored, and Indian. They're not white. And the 100% of some parts of the political leadership that Dr. Ramalaine was looking at are black. These are all signs that things have changed. And that change is important. But the other thing that's important is what hasn't changed. The unemployed who've suffered, the people in rural areas who remain disconnected from basic services and suffer. That hasn't changed. In fact, that's gotten worse. Black unemployment has, roughly speaking, doubled since 2007. In order to address the next challenge of the next change we have to make together as a country, we believe strongly, like Dr. Ramalaine was saying, it's time to let go of these racial classifications. They have become shackles that are holding us down to our past, and in particular, I believe, are holding poor South Africans in a position where they can't achieve their potential because of the lack of investment that comes as a result of the red tape around BEE and other policies like it.
Gabriel, while I still have you, Dr. Ramalaine spoke about the acknowledging of reality. How important is truth-telling about historical injustices in the reconciliation process?
I think it's extremely important. And, people like Dr. Boshoff, people like Ernst Rutz, there's a growing group of people who, apartheid apologists would be a technical term for them, but basically they say apartheid wasn't so bad. They try and sweep under the rug some of the very important aspects of the injustices that occurred there. And this is counterproductive. It's a historical revisionism. And unfortunately, it's not just white people. I sometimes hear from people of all sorts. I've been in TV debates with other people who have said, things were better during apartheid. It connects to this point that I was saying earlier, where now a small majority would actually give up our democracy in order to get more jobs and security. It's that kind of hankering for the sort of fascist, authoritarian, centralized control, cookie cutter approach to racial things. As long as our country has rising or stagnant unemployment, as long as we don't grow I think those messages of populism will continue to be attractive in different forms. And being serious about our history means saying, never again can we go down that fascist road where some little minority is undermining democracy to its own particular interest.
All right. And Dr. Ramalaine, just to close off our conversation, Doc, maybe just talk to us to what you think would be the transformative role that education would play in shaping the attitudes towards diversity.
Yes, just before I do that, I'd like to respond to Mr. Crouse, to say to him that I think the fundamental thing that is still missing in this country, which we don't want to have a conversation about, is the economics of this country. When we talk about social cohesion in this country, it almost gives me the impression that we would like to maintain as far as possible less disturbance of what we had agreed as a negotiated settlement that favors a particular group of people in a particular way. When the two groups from both sides of the railway line came together and gave us what we have today in race definition, but also in terms of economic definition. And so, yes, the reality is that social cohesion in this country is in a crisis, and we know that because there's no jobs that are being produced in this nation, at this point in time. 64% of our young people are unemployed. And we're dealing with the problems of an unsafe society. We have seen how our president took a delegation to the US and bemoaned the fact in the White House of how criminal and how crime-ridden we are in this country. How can we talk about social cohesion in spaces like that? Then you move to the subject matter of accountability in this country. Accountability that extends itself to political leadership. We have at this point in time a crisis of leadership in this country. And unfortunately, for as long as we are willing to have these sentimental debates about a neighbor talking to a neighbor and not wanting to drill down and deal with these issues, we are not going to go anywhere. On the subject of education, certainly we appreciate the fact that we have sojourned and come to where we are right now. Education is a fundamental aspect of every society that's ever unshackled itself from poverty or inequality. However, we have not prioritized, in my view, one of the examples I use, and sometimes people shoot you for saying this, by the time Mugabe took Rhodesia over, there were 9 problems in Zimbabwe. Mugabe realized he couldn't fix all 9. He took one, it was education. I dare anyone to prove me wrong that you can go anywhere in the world, you will find an educated Zimbabwean. The fact that that education doesn't translate to economic development in the country is a different subject. We in this country chose to we took on all the issues and we delivered on very few, if anything, if possible. And so it is sad that we are not yet prioritizing education, which we should have, which I concur efforts have been made in that regard. Right. And we salute those that are part of that. We not want to sound as if we are, completely negative in that regard. But I think much more can be done in that space. And I do think that we've got to look at, for example, what is the connection between letting a grade R or a grade 1 student into class and how many of them complete in grade 12, which we call matric at this point in time. It's what happens between those 12 years and those we lose along the way. We get excited about the 600 or the 200,000 that finishes at the end of a particular year, as we will do so in the next couple of weeks. But the fact of the matter is there's over 600,000 that have died along the way, educationally dead in that regard. And that's right. And eventually they go into a system called a grant system of 350. And these are all the stress factors of social cohesion in this country. But we must become honest. We must deal honestly.
All right. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. But Dr. Ramalaine, as well as Gabriel Crouse, thank you for your inputs this evening. Certainly in the midst of an unsafe society, youth unemployment, lack of accountability, as well as all the economic disparities, the issue of reconciliation still seems so far from what we want to achieve. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.